and welcome back. My name is Sheldon McLeod. This is Thinking Out Loud, presented to you here on the SaltWire Network. I invite you to find our YouTube channel, to like and subscribe, and to leave your comments on the stories that we're covering and the information that we're bringing forward. And I really do appreciate having this platform, an opportunity for me to talk about the stories that are, well, important to all of us. And I don't know if you caught this. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business, doctors are spending over 18 million hours a year on what they describe as unnecessary administrative work. Part of this also talks about how Nova Scotia has taken steps to, quote unquote, reduce the red tape, improving patient care. And there was a very telling story from my colleague Frank Campbell at SaltWire.com in the Herald. Give retiring Nova Scotia doctors incentives to stay in practice. This is quoting a specific doctor who has a position here and has a perspective that I want to share with you. And Dr. George Burden is here with us. And Doctor, thank you very much for sharing some of your time with me today.
Thank you, Sheldon.
And just for sake of introduction, how long have you been practicing medicine?
I've been or was a family doctor for 43 years in Elmsdale, Nova Scotia. I started there in my early 20s in 1979 and thought I'd stay for a year or two and ended up staying for 43.
And here you are announcing that your retirement is happening, and I'm sure patients were worried, concerned with the list of physicians who are, or a list of Nova Scotians who are waiting for physicians. How did you feel about coming to this point in your life and your career?
Well, Sheldon, the decision was sort of made for me because I had retirement on the horizon with the idea that I would continue to work perhaps half-time and had been advocating for that for a while as well. Unfortunately, I was walking across a crosswalk back last summer, and I was struck by a vehicle that I guess didn't see me and ended up racking up my hands. So what's happened is I had to retire earlier than I had anticipated. I did sort of end up, well, with these splints, and I was able to function for a couple of months to get my patients' prescriptions done over and keeping my fingers crossed and hoping someone would come along to take over the practice. That didn't happen, but I gave everybody a year's worth of scripts and tried to get some of my sicker patients teed up with a few of my colleagues. Couldn't do it for everybody, but obviously someone who's newly diagnosed with a serious cancer, for example, those people do need to be followed up, and I did my best to get those people looked after.
We're hearing a lot about work-life balance, and I'm not sure what type of or what size of patient load you had, and I don't know if it's fair to call it a patient load, but the people that you were caring for the last 40 some odd years, that new doctors entering the profession don't want to take on a huge number of patients like you would have done in the past. Are you seeing that in real life? Is this anecdotal or is this true?
It's true. Excuse me. My practice consists of about 2,000 patients. They tell me I'm 1.3 full-time equivalent doctors, or I was. I'm not sure. I think that was underestimating it a bit. But the bottom line was, what I was finding was that I would go to work, put in a 10-hour day, work through most of my lunch hours to stay ahead of things. And when you looked at it, I hadn't actually dealt with a large number of patients by the ordinary standards, but I have an elderly, very complex practice with people who have multiple lab tests coming in, consultant reports, and what happens is I have to deal with these things. I have to follow up with them. And it's probably an even greater load than most of my younger confreres would be dealing with, because for the simple reason that my patients are older. And
I hear people talk about physician assistants. Is that something that you had embraced in any way, licensed practical nurse or someone within the scope of their practice who could help you with some of what is really a lot of paperwork, administration, and patient care?
Sure. Well, most people criticize the government, sometimes justifiably so, but a couple of years ago, the health department did provide us, we have a large, sort of a comprehensive care clinic, and they provided us with a couple of nurses, which were invaluable to me, family practice nurses. They worked with me very quite independently, but I would supervise things, and they would look after the babies, the well woman visits, that type of thing. It freed my time up for the more complex stuff that was really tapping into my, higher levels of educational skills. Not that the nurses aren't well educated, but I have a few more years under my belt. So that was a great team effort, and that really allowed me to function where I'm not sure I would have still been able to function without that resource.
And I certainly do want to talk about the idea, it's a suggestion, the stipend, but did you have any intention of becoming a business person when you went to med school?
None whatsoever. They didn't teach us about it, and it was kind of an incidental thing to practicing medicine. But then you realize that, hey, I've got a business to run here. I think a lot of people don't realize is that most of those clinics out there are owned and paid for by the doctors that are running them. So, when you see, Dr. So-and-so billed X amount, well, that X amount is providing you with your parking spot. It's providing the salary to the staff that are in the facility, the front office staff. It provides all the medications that we use for injections, that type of thing, all the dressings, the instruments. So essentially, there's a big chunk of that comes out to kind of keep these facilities open and available for people.
I find it fascinating that when the current Medicare system was established, it was about patient care, but not about infrastructure. It wasn't about the buildings or the places people need to go. And as a young doctor, here you are hanging your shingle, but yet doing all the administration that comes along with being a business person as well. And I'm sure that does impact patient care over time. And perhaps it impacts graduating or practicing physicians entering the field from deciding it would be just easier for them to be a specialist in a hospital environment. They don't have to worry about that. Do you feel government and there's a recognition that is a challenge right now, that that model does not perhaps work as well for that life-work balance that people are talking about?
Yes, I think it's starting to sink in that, especially as things get more complex, electronic medical records, that type of thing. I mean, back in the old days, you're running a building, trying to do some hiring staff, that type of thing. But now it's a much more complex dynamic, and you could spend half your time trying to run your business, which is not an efficient use of my time because I'm not trained to be a business person. I'm probably not very good at it. Most of my colleagues are superb physicians, but really not so great at running a business.
Now, to this idea that there's a way forward, if I'm not mistaken, about 200 or so doctors who would be considered, at retirement age or beyond 65 in the province. What is it that you suggest the government should do to help bring some relief to the people who don't have a primary care provider and those doctors who might be looking to ease their way out before they hang up the stethoscope for good?
Well, Sheldon, I'm glad you asked that question, because what I see is you've got 200 doctors. Now, the older docs tend to have larger practices, so you're probably looking at a minimum of 12 to 1,500 patients. In some cases, I know colleagues that have 3,000 or 4,000 patients that they are looking after. So I'm going to say conservatively that when those physicians, and these are family doctors, over the age of 65 do decide to retire, it's probably going to happen over a fairly short time span, and you will suddenly have another 200 to 250,000 Nova Scotians without a family doctor. So, a lot of my colleagues are getting a bit burnt out by all the paperwork, by the fact they have an aging practice and so on. Maybe there's not enough help sort of coming in to assist them in handling the practices. And perhaps just, you're at the age where your grandkids are kind of fun. You want to spend more time with family. And so what I was saying was, maybe I know in my own case, I would have gone on for quite some time on a half-time capacity doing locums or whatever, and said unfortunately I was injured, but that was my idea that I wanted to do, and I think there's a lot of physicians that would say, yeah, I'd like to have a little more time off, but go back to my office and maybe bring somebody else in, and I'll work half-time. They'll work half-time. Or possibly even if you had two sort of semi-retired physicians, bring another full-time one in who would take on half of each practice. So it's a win-win situation for everybody, because you've got a new doc who doesn't really know these patients. So if he's got a question about somebody, something, that you look at in a patient, I've known for years, and maybe I know that they've got their kidneys are out of whack, or there's something going on, but I know it's stable. So if a new doc comes in, they could be spending a lot of time trying to sort out something that I could sort out in a sentence or two. So you've got the benefits of the older doc who's got the knowledge of the patients and so on, the experience. You've got a younger doc who's probably more up on the newer things coming out, so they can, teach me some things as well. And the patients, it's a win-win, because they have, two heads instead of just one. So that would have been a dynamic, I think, that would attract to a lot of family doctors who are either thinking of retiring, or even a few I've talked to who have retired, and I kind of discussed this idea with them, and they've said, wow, if that had been an option for me, I wouldn't have quit. I'd have stayed on for a while longer. So it seems to me it's a win-win-win situation for doctors, patients, government.
I'm curious to your thoughts on the premier after the healthcare summit saying we don't need turf wars. If the premier is suggesting there are turf wars within healthcare, the acute system right through to long-term care, is that a perspective that you share? Are you seeing that? And what is that doing, if so, to the overall plan to fix the system?
Well, I'm not sure what they mean by turf wars. I don't have time to engage in any kind of turf wars or wars of any kind. But what I see happening, and maybe some people, especially fee-for-service physicians, is a lot of times, especially when I first started practicing, I had maybe 5% of the population were over 65. So I had senior citizens, and you all got paid the same, whether it was a 5-year-old with a runny nose or a multiple illness complex care senior. But it might take me 30 minutes to deal with the senior and 10 minutes to deal with the younger person. So the simple, easier things on a fee-for-service basis kind of subsidize the things that are taking so much extra time. And what happens is now a lot of that, the simpler, quicker stuff is being looked after by pharmacists and so on. And yes, better somebody looks after it than nobody. But I find that I'm being left with the more complex stuff. So I might see 3 patients in an hour. I mean, my productivity from the perspective of number of patients that go through may not look that good, but from the amount of work I'm putting in looking at these patients' lab tests, looking at, okay, you have kidney failure, you've got to adjust this medication, you have heart failure, but your potassium's out of whack. I mean, that's a little bit of my mindset as I'm sitting there chatting with you in my office. All these things are going through my head, and that can be quite time consuming and disastrous if you don't think them through, if you rush through it. So there's, I think, the dynamic you may be talking about in terms of turf wars.
I'm glad to hear that your focus is on patient care and not the war. But to that end, it's a political scientist once told me that to say we need to get the politics out of healthcare it's never going to happen, because it is politic. It is about allocating and choosing priorities. That's what politics is. That's what politics does. But there should not be a moratorium on good ideas. You're presenting an idea. I see that there's an announcement coming up in a couple of hours about Pharmacy Association with a pilot health project of some sort with the provincial government, something that their association has been pushing for. So your thoughts on whether there'll be some uptake here, regardless of where this idea came from and whatever party was there at that news conference to suggest it.
Sure. Well, I think optimally, pharmacists, certainly get familiar with certain medical problems. They know the common stuff and so on. And if you're going to be sitting in an emergency department for 12 hours and you don't have a family doctor, I certainly can see a role for a pharmacist. In fact, my niece is actually a pharmacist who's one of the 3 in a pilot project in Nova Scotia right now, working with a family practice. So I definitely see a role there, but I'm not sure that the pharmacists, the problems that are simple, probably are simple 90 or 95% of the time. But every once in a while, that indigestion turns out to be a heart attack, not gas. And there are certain problems that can turn out to have consequences that may not be initially appreciated if you're not in an office with a physical examination or the ability to do EKGs, blood work, that type of thing. So yes, I think the pharmacists are stepping up to help where there's a need, but it may not be the ideal situation, but maybe it's the best we can do for now.
And to the idea that you're suggesting to have soon to be retiring physicians provided a stipend, given some opportunity to help perhaps train or assist in that transfer, how likely do you feel it is that the Premier's going to say, that's a great idea, let's do it?
I think, the Premier seems to be a pretty sensible guy. I see this as an option that is going to bring doctors that would normally be gone, at least partially back into the fold. Now, if you have 200 doctors that are going to retire completely, and 100 of them, say, stay on and provide, say, we have what are called APPs, and a full-time equivalent is a certain number of patients of a certain age. So say I'm a 1.3. So say I came back as a 0.65, brought in another doctor as a 0.65, and decided to work on for 2, maybe 5 years. It doesn't necessarily have to be. And I know I know physicians that are in their 80s that are still quite productive. So we may decide to stay on. But if you can keep 100 doctors working half time, then you're talking 100,000 patients or 50,000 patients. You're talking substantial numbers that would not have a family doctor if they stay on.
The province's health authority CEO says getting rid of the challenges and opening things up to new ideas. It seems there's a real desire to or want to embrace that. And just before we conclude the conversation, I have to ask Dr. Burden, any thoughts on just the conversation we've had today and what people should know who might be on a list waiting for a primary care provider, or they are finding out that their doctor decided that they're hanging up the stethoscope, as I've referred to it?
Well, if the province can come up with a good plan, sometimes the doctors aren't quite as tuned into the current events. You might say to your doctor, I heard this great idea where they were talking about maybe getting docs to work, they're maybe getting retirement age to just work half time. And, what do you think about involving yourself in something like that? And, that might give your senior family doc who you think may want to retire pause, and maybe he'll think and say, a couple of days a week, that would be okay. It would get me out of the wife's hair for a couple of days, so, still have plenty of time to spend with my grandkids and family. And, that's the dynamic I see. And I think a lot of my confers would certainly go for a situation like that, Sheldon.
Dr. George Burden, continued healing and good luck with the hands. Hopefully that's something that comes back for you soon. Thank you for this. I really appreciate your time, and we'll hope that people take us up on this offer to talk about this, to keep telling people about the good ideas, and regardless of the political stripe that may be endorsing it, I think a good idea is a good idea no matter where it comes from.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Sheldon, for having me. You have a good morning.
You too.